I'm Aileen. At my own niece's birthday party, my mother whispered, "Don't let people see those scars. It's upsetting the children." Then my sister grabbed my arm and snapped, "Cover them up. You're ruining the photos." They thought they were shaming me, but when a retired general noticed the faded unit tattoo on my forearm, the room went dead silent. Before we dive in, what time is it where you are? Drop a comment. We read everyone. Now let me show you what they never expected to happen next. Dad's birthday invitation slid through my mailbox on a damp Thursday morning, 47 hours before the party. The cream envelope looked elegant, but the ink on my name, Eileen Rayner, was smudged as if someone had second-guessed spelling it. For 10 minutes, I stood in the kitchen turning the card over, weighing the risk of reopening a door I'd closed after the last Thanksgiving argument. The RSVP card was already ticked yes in someone else's handwriting. Typical. They wanted the head count, not my voice. I tossed a handful of clothes into an overnight bag, then hesitated at the dresser. Lying atop a stack of VA statements was the brown handkerchief I'd carried home from Iraq. It was coarse, stained in one corner with iodine, and embroidered in the barracks by a corpsman who didn't make it back. I slid it into my purse, not to honor him if I'm honest, but to cover the scar running like dried riverbed from my wrist to my elbow. The scar my family pretended was an eyesore we'd all be better without. The drive to Fairfax took 90 minutes. October light filtered through red maples, but my palms still gripped the steering wheel the way they had gripped a Humvee door the night we were hit. At red lights, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Silver hair at the temples, skin tougher than it once was, but eyes steady. I arrived at the event hall just before sunset. Valets in black vests whisked BMWs and Teslas to the side lot. My Toyota pickup earned a raised eyebrow. Inside, chandeliers glowed over gold-clothed tables. My sister Celine glided toward me, ivory dress hugging her like a press release. "You made it," she said, voice pitched for nearby donors. The hug was cool, fingertips only. "You look healthy," I murmured thanks. She pulled back, gaze dropping to my arm. "You brought a wrap, I hope. Photo start in 20 minutes. My smile held. "Good to see you too." Guests milled around highboy tables. A cousin I hadn't seen since Mom's knee surgery nodded without recognition. My brother-in-law Wade lifted his scotch and announced to a cluster of lawyers, "Celine's younger sister served somewhere overseas, right?" Laughter. I located the bar, ordered club soda, and pretended the fizz drowned the echo of his words. The photographer called for immediate family. Someone handed me Dad's orthopedic cane to hold so he could stand straighter in the photo. As I stepped beside Celine, she hissed, "Other side, Aileen. Sunlight's better for smooth skin." I moved left. She pursed her lips. Farther. I ended up near a potted palm half out of frame. Flashbulbs sparked. My sleeve rode up, revealing the ragged edge of the scar. Celine's smile cracked. She whispered, "Cover them up. You're ruining the photos." Conversation around us faded. I reached into my purse, drew out the handkerchief, and wrapped it slowly, knotting the cloth like I was tying off memory. The photographer cleared his throat, snapped again, and declared the shot perfect. Afterward, I drifted toward the antipasto table. A woman with a diamond crucifix asked if I was one of the caterers. I said no, took a single grape, and moved on. Near the punch bowl, Wade regaled an insurance broker with tales of his new beach condo, purchased, he bragged, without dipping into retirement. I wondered if the monthly withdrawals from the Aileen Recovery Fund helped. A voicemail buzzed in my pocket, an old message I kept saved for nights when silence felt heavy. Mom's voice brittle, "We just don't know how to explain this to people, honey. Maybe skip Christmas this year until you've healed." That was 8 years ago. I never pressed delete. A toast bell tinkled. I re-entered the ballroom, seating myself at a table marked reserved but empty. Celine stood at the podium, crystal flute in hand. "To the women who hold this family together," she declared, eyes locking onto mine. "Strength comes in many forms." Applause washed over me like lukewarm rain. I clapped twice, palm against fist, the handkerchief still hiding what made me, in her view, defective. My gaze drifted across the room and snagged on an older man seated alone near the doors. Steel gray hair, shoulders squared despite the cane leaning against his chair. A small Vietnam service pin glittered on his lapel. He studied me not with pity, but with the practiced attention of someone scanning a battlefield for movement. Our eyes held. He rose carefully, gripping the cane, then began walking straight toward me. The chatter fell to a hush, and I felt every heartbeat from Kandahar to Fairfax pounding in my ears. He closed the distance with measured steps, cane tapping once for every 2 heartbeats I tried to quiet. By the time the general reached me, the laughter had fizzled, and the string quartet stumbled into silence as if someone yanked their sheet music away. "Ma'am," he began, voice carrying the gravel of barracks mornings, "may I see the rest of that stitching?" Instinct tightened my fingers over the brown cloth. Curiosity rustled behind us. I should have refused, tucked my arm beneath the linen napkin, vanished back into the edges. Instead, I peeled the handkerchief down an inch just enough for the faded outline of a falcon clutching lightning bolts to surface. He drew in a breath that sounded like memory. Then, leaning closer so only I could hear, he spoke 4 words, a call and answer from a world still classified last week. "Shadow holds, sunrise runs." The reply left my mouth on reflex. "Midnight waits. Mission done." I hadn't said it in 9 years. General Harold Loring straightened, eyes shining. "Ghost Echo," he announced, pivoting toward the crowd. "Declassified as of Tuesday. Folks, This woman served in the finest casualty extraction unit our army ever fielded. Gasps fluttered across the room like startled birds. A cocktail glass clinked to the floor. Even the photographer's flash paused mid-charge. Celine's perfect posture wilted. She pressed a hand to her necklace, pearls slipping between manicured fingers. I could have shrunk. Instead, I stood rooted, unsure whether to thank him or beg him to stop. Validation felt suspicious, like a check written on an overdrawn account. The general raised my hand gently, almost courtly. Kandahar, 08/00/2006. Ghost Echo pulled 3 of my boys from an alley ambush. Only a handful of medics made it home. She's one. A lone clap broke the hush. Then another. Applause built, hesitant but genuine. I didn't bow. I couldn't move. Lights seared my eyes, and for a second the banquet hall blurred with the glow of a burning convoy. Celine swept in. Smile lacquered on. Well, she trilled, I guess even black sheep get medals now. Her laugh varnished the words, but the barb landed true. Mom chuckled too loudly, squeezing Celine's arm as if applause were a virus we might catch. Dad lifted his phone, pretending it vibrated and slipped toward the lobby. My niece tugged my sleeve. Aunt Aileen, did it hurt? Some, I answered, unclenching my fist so she wouldn't see my knuckles bleaching. General Loring guided me toward a side corridor lined with commemorative photos of other events, anniversaries, fundraisers, never wars. We stopped beneath a sconce. I recognized the family name, he said. You treated Lieutenant Carter, my godson. He's a surgeon now, thanks to you. He hesitated. He wrote your folks multiple times. You never got those letters? My chest hollowed. No. I was told the mail went missing. His lips pressed thin. They didn't lose it. They buried it. And your commendation packet, it's stalled in legal. Political trade-off from what Carter pieced together. If you're ready to drag it into daylight, I know an attorney who lives for this. I steadied my breathing. Send me the number. My hand found the edge of the napkin again, thumb rubbing the embroidered thread until heat warmed the scar beneath. Nearby, Celine whispered to the event photographer, gesturing toward my deserted table. The man nodded, tapping his camera screen. Something cold settled in my gut. Before returning to the ballroom, the general squeezed my shoulder. You don't owe them silence. Inside, conversation swirled, now flavored with cautious respect. Strangers approached with soft congratulations, but the compliments glanced off, unable to penetrate years of practiced invisibility. I thanked them anyway, voice even, because soldiers learn to receive awkward gratitude the way they accept midnight rations, politely, then keep moving. At our family table, Celine's laptop sat open beside the centerpiece. She clicked, frowned, clicked again. I watched thumbnails of the evening scroll past, family portraits minus the potted palm, Aunt Marlene hugging Wade, Mom laughing near the cake. In none of them did my handkerchief appear. My scar, my face. Each image where I'd stood seconds earlier now framed an artful gap. One by one, she highlighted files and tapped delete. Her head tilted when she sensed me. Digital clutter, she explained, tone honeyed. No reason to keep redundant shots. You mean shots with me? If that's how you want to frame it. She closed the lid, smile shrinking to a slit. You got your applause. Let's not make it awkward. Behind her the general conversed with Dad, whose expression had curdled into something between annoyance and fear. I reminded myself to breathe. Celine reached for the laptop again. I laid my palm over hers, gently but immovable, the napkin's edge brushing her wrist. There's nothing redundant about truth, I said, meeting her eyes. Her answer was a whisper soaked in contempt. Watch me, and she resumed erasing, thumbnail by thumbnail, until the evening we shared dissolved into blank space. I blinked once, maybe twice, trying to convince myself I hadn't just seen what I saw. But there it was, Celine's thumb tapping with methodical cruelty, deleting my face from each frame like it was a speck of lint on her carefully pressed blouse. I stepped forward, quiet but firm. Why are you deleting those? I asked, my voice low enough for civility, sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't even look up. You ruined the symmetry. Wade, lounging beside the punch table with that same smug posture he'd perfected in high school, let out a chuckle. It's true, he added, swirling the ice in his cup. You kinda mess up the whole aesthetic, Aileen. I leaned in close enough that Celine would feel the heat in my words. You're deleting me just like you did after Mom's stroke, remember that? Her fingers paused just for a second, then resumed tapping. You're still on that? She murmured, as if I were talking about a parking ticket and not the erasure of a person. The memory crashed in before I could brace for it. I had flown home on emergency leave, still in uniform, boots dusty from a tarmac halfway around the world, but no one picked me up. No one even told me Mom was in the ICU until 2 days after she'd been admitted. When I finally walked into her hospital room, the nurse had looked at me with confusion. They said you wouldn't come, she told me, that you were unreachable, as if I'd been floating in space instead of responding to encrypted emails daily. They told the hospital staff not to expect me, signed paperwork without me, assigned medical power of attorney to Wade of all people. Back in the present, Celine finally lifted her eyes, bored and unfazed. We didn't think you'd show. You'd disappear for years, then come back acting like you've been wronged. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't let it rise to my face. You had every way to reach me. You chose not to. She shrugged, as if I were simply an old receipt she forgot to throw out. A small group had started to form around us, relatives lingering by the dessert table, others stepping closer from the cocktail lounge, and of course, Wade couldn't resist. "You act like this place owes you something," he said, laughing. "Like your ghost stories from overseas matter here." That stung more than I wanted it to. Dad chose that moment to step in. Not to defend, not to de-escalate, but to shut me up. "Let's not turn this into a scene," he said sharply, eyes already scanning for a new exit. Celine gave him a tight smile, like a student being praised. "Exactly. This is a celebration." Someone nearby muttered, "This is why we keep things quiet from her. She always takes it too far." I turned slowly, letting my eyes travel across the room. Not one person spoke for me. Not one voice said, "That's not fair." Just then a projector buzzed to life, and the evening's photo slideshow began. Smiles flickered across the screen. Family Christmases, backyard barbecues, beach trips with neon floaties and plastic cups of lemonade. All of it familiar. All of it missing one thing. Me. Not one picture from childhood. Not even those awkward teen years where braces and bad bangs couldn't be ignored. It was like I never existed. My breath caught when a 4th of July photo played, the one where I remembered holding the sparkler between Celine and Wade, both of them screaming with laughter. But in the photo now, just the two of them. A cropped memory. I'd been cut out with such precision it was surgical. I stood frozen, the room buzzing with polite applause, some guests chuckling at Wade's childhood bowl cut. I was the only one who saw the glaring hole. Needing air, I slipped quietly past the chatter and down the hallway toward the coat room. My jacket was still hanging near the end, half buried behind an oversized fur someone had brought out of fashion obligation. As I reached for the sleeve, something shifted, a soft crinkle from the inside pocket. I frowned and pulled out a plain white envelope for you. Not from them. No return address, no handwriting I recognized. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edges. Inside, 2 pages. A photocopy of my military discharge papers. Except they weren't mine. Not really. My role, once listed clearly as Special Operations Communications Technician, was now labeled Logistical Support. My commendations? Gone. The unit name? Blurred into some generic abbreviation. Someone had tampered with it, and I knew who it had to be. Back when I enlisted, Dad had been my emergency contact. All my mail had gone through the house. He'd once bragged to neighbors about his daughter in the big leagues. But somewhere along the way, the letters stopped coming. The awards never arrived. I thought it was bureaucracy. Now I knew better. My stomach turned. This wasn't emotional exclusion anymore. This was calculated, deliberate, institutional erasure. It explained the missing medals, the unanswered letters, why no one ever followed up after Kandahar, why the Ghost Echo file stayed buried. I sat down on the bench, gripping the envelope like it might vanish. A wave of quiet resolve settled in my chest. They didn't just delete my pictures, they deleted my legacy. I needed to get out of that room, of that house, of whatever warped version of family they kept building around themselves, brick by brick, memory by memory, with me always on the outside. I stood and tucked the envelope close beneath my arm like a lifeline. As I stepped outside into the cool air, my father's voice followed me like a shadow. "You were never supposed to see that." The night air clung to my skin like truth I couldn't wash off. The laughter from the reception hall sounded hollow now, like it belonged to someone else's celebration. I gripped the envelope tighter, its weight suddenly heavier than any duffel I'd carried through the desert. My father stood behind me, his voice just above a whisper. "You were never supposed to see that." I didn't turn around, but I did. He stepped beside me, his eyes darting toward the catering tent where a few servers smoked behind the fence. "Aileen, this isn't the place." I cut him off. "Who forged it?" His jaw tightened. He glanced at the envelope in my hand, then away. "It was handled by the legal team. Don't dance around this." "That's not what I asked." My voice was steady, but my heart thudded in my ears. "You signed off on it, didn't you?" A long pause. Then finally, he nodded. "I did what was best for the family," he said too quickly. "You were unstable, angry. You came back with changes." I took a step back, trying not to laugh. "Unstable? I was coming home from a war zone. I was supposed to be angry. I was supposed to be different." He ran a hand down his face, looking older than I remembered. "There was more to it. A political mess. A congressman's son got caught in something during your deployment. He lost his commission. The army wanted someone to blame. It could have gone public." I stared at him. "So you erased me?" "They offered us a deal. Quiet discharge. No charges. Your name clean. They told us someone in your family had to co-sign for it to be sealed. And you signed away my dignity without asking me?" He didn't respond, just looked at the ground ashamed or pretending to be. I let silence hang between us. Somewhere behind the tent, a bottle clinked into a bin. "You knew I'd come back and feel the cold. You just never thought I'd figure out why." "You're not in jail," he muttered. "You should be grateful." That broke something in me. I turned fully to face him now. Grateful? For a sanitized record and a family that acts like I never existed? For stolen medals and a father who traded my honor for his peace of mind? He took a step forward. "Aileen, no," I said sharply. "You made that decision for your comfort, not mine." For a moment neither of us moved. Then I turned and walked back toward the building, toward the lights and the voices that suddenly felt too loud. Inside, they were wrapping up some kind of toast. Celine stood near the projection screen, her arm wrapped around Wade's, holding up a framed collage of family memories, a curated lie. The slideshow began again behind them. Photos flashed across the screen. Barbecues, graduations, birthdays, but not one with me, not even the ones I knew I'd been in. I stepped forward, my voice calm. Does anyone know where my photos went? The chatter stopped. Heads turned. Celine didn't flinch. She just sipped her wine and said, "You were never really part of the center, Aileen." That sentence burned in my chest, but I didn't show it. I didn't blink. Then a voice came from the side of the room. "That's not true." Heads turned. It was the retired general, still in his dark blazer, still standing tall like he never left the service. His eyes were on me. "This woman saved lives," he said, clear and firm. "I know because one of them was my son." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Celine's wineglass wavered. The general walked closer. During an ambush in Kandahar, she made the call to divert her unit to rescue trapped civilians, including my son who was volunteering with a local hospital. That decision cost her politically, but saved more lives than will ever count. He looked at me, and it's time your record reflects that. I didn't know what to say. My throat clenched. He turned to the room. "Shame on anyone who let this woman be erased." Somewhere near the bar, I heard a stifled sniffle. A few guests looked down at their feet. He looked back at me. "I can help file the appeal. We'll make them reopen the record." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, but I'm not doing this to be seen." He tilted his head. "Then why?" "Because truth doesn't belong in a file cabinet." He gave me a slow nod. The kind you give a fellow soldier who survived more than just bullets. But just as the quiet began to settle, a cold voice cut through it like ice cracking. Celine stood taller, her smile reappearing like a blade. "If she's airing secrets," she said sweetly, "maybe I should share what she did in high school." The room stilled again. I didn't flinch. I took one step forward then another until we were nearly face to face under the amber chandelier. "You want to talk about high school?" My voice was steady, not loud, but it cut through the silence. "Okay, let's talk." Around us the clink of glasses and silverware fell away. Even the music which had been playing softly in the background faded into irrelevance. The general stood still near the back, eyes narrowing as he watched the storm gather. Dad muttered under his breath, "Not here. Not now." But the dam had cracked. "Senior year," I said, looking at her, not blinking. "National Humanities Essay Contest. A full scholarship to Stanford. A feature in the paper." I tilted my head slightly. "Do you remember how that essay magically appeared in your folder the day of the deadline?" Celine's lips tightened. She didn't say a word. "Because I do." I slowly reached into my purse. No sudden movements. Just the slow, deliberate extraction of something I'd carried for over 15 years, a manila folder, yellowed and frayed at the corners. "I wrote that essay, Celine. The original. Drafted it at 2 a.m. while you were out with friends. Miss Holloway gave it back to me with a note. She loved it, called it haunting, mature, and deeply original. I was going to submit it myself until I couldn't find it in my folder the next morning. I held it up now, eye level, and here it is." A murmur ran through the crowd, followed by the creak of chairs as people leaned forward. Even some of the younger cousins who hadn't been born at the time were craning their necks. Celine laughed. "Brittle. You're seriously pulling out old homework like it's the FBI?" "No," I said. "I'm pulling out truth." I walked it over to the general. "Would you mind reading the last note aloud?" I didn't look at Cellini. I couldn't, not yet. The general adjusted his glasses and read, "This work reflects the voice of a young woman who has seen too much and still chooses to write with compassion. Miss Holloway. March 5th. I turned back to Celine. "That's 2 weeks before your winning submission. And the handwriting on the essay you turned in, that wasn't yours. It was mine. Typed with my formatting, my structure, my citations." Celine's face had drained of all color. Dad rubbed his forehead like this was giving him a headache, but Mom sat rigid like someone trying to pretend she wasn't part of the scene. Celine's voice cracked. "That was years ago. Everyone bends the truth a little to get ahead. I didn't think it would matter." "Except it did," I replied. "You got a full ride. You built your resume on a lie." And I caught myself before the bitterness spilled too fast. "I got rejection letters and silence." She took a step toward me, voice rising. "I earned everything after that on my own. I worked hard. You were always the weird one, the moody one. I just capitalized." My fingers clenched around the folder. Celine turned, looking around, voice growing shrill. "You all think I'm the villain here? Please. She's dredging up high school drama like this is some courtroom." One of the university donors, Miss Ritter, I think, stood up quietly and walked away. Then another. Chairs pushed back in a hush of shame. Celine spun to Mom. "Say something." Mom looked up, her eyes glossy. "Can't you both just let it go? It was so long ago." I took a deep breath. "I did let it go for years. I buried it, but you didn't let me go. You dragged me back into this family just to play the scapegoat. You paraded Celine's perfect record, and held me up as the one who couldn't stay stable, when all along it was built on pieces of my life." For the first time, Uncle Gary, silent and skeptical all night, spoke. "We always wondered why you didn't end up at Stanford. Thought maybe you just didn't care enough." His words stung more than I expected. Another aunt shifted in her seat, cleared her throat, and murmured, "I remember that article in the paper." Celine quoted a phrase I swear I'd heard Aileen say before. I thought it was coincidence. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence said it all. I turned to the general. "I'll accept your help, but only if every correction, every record, every trace of what was taken, military or otherwise, is made public. I don't want a quiet fix. I want sunlight." The general gave a slow, deliberate nod. Agreed. I looked at my sister one last time, and all I saw was the unraveling of a mask. Just when I thought the air might begin to clear, Celine leaned toward our mother and whispered loud enough for me to hear, just barely. She doesn't know about the second fund, does she? My hand froze on the stem of the wineglass. Did she really just say that? I turned my head slightly. Celine's voice had been soft, too soft for the guests to catch, but clear enough for me. She doesn't know about the second fund, does she? Her eyes flitted to our mother and then to me, like she was testing just how much damage she could still inflict. I didn't react, not in front of everyone. I simply set the glass down, smiled at the general with a tight nod, and excused myself from the table. The house was dim and quiet by the time I made it inside. Most of the guests were still out on the back patio finishing drinks, laughing nervously, pretending the evening hadn't imploded. I stepped into the kitchen. The low of the refrigerator filled the silence and there she was, my mother, wiping down an already clean counter like it might distract her from what was coming. "Mom," I said, my voice low, deliberate. "What's the second fund?" She paused, then turned around with a practiced smile. "Aileen, honey, it was just something your father set up. A small backup. We never touched it. Just for emergencies, that's all." I stepped closer, arms folded. "Why didn't I know about it?" She shrugged too quickly. "You were deployed. There was no need to bother you with the details. That wasn't your decision to make," I replied. "Where is it? Show me." She waved a hand. "It's probably closed by now. It was just a safety net, sweetheart." I stared at her, and for a second I saw the flicker. Something behind her eyes shifted. Not confusion, not regret. Guilt. I turned without a word and headed down the hall. My father's old office door was still shut. I hadn't stepped foot in there since before my second tour. I reached into the junk drawer by the sideboard, the one where he always kept the backup key, and felt for the familiar metal ridge. It was still there. Inside, the office smelled faintly of paper and old cologne. Nothing had changed. Not the dusty family photo from 1992, not the framed veteran supporter certificate that hung beside the bookshelf. The bottom drawer of the old filing cabinet was locked. Not for long. I slid the key in, turned it, and the drawer gave way with a reluctant groan. Inside were folders, neat and labeled. One caught my eye immediately. Aileen Rowe Recovery Fund. Trustee Elizabeth Rowe. My chest tightened. I pulled the folder out, sat on the edge of the worn office chair, and began flipping through the contents. The statements dated back almost 15 years. Monthly deposits from the VA, disability compensation, each followed almost like clockwork by a withdrawal to an account under my mother's name. And every so often, a note, transfer, household expenses, payment, Celine tuition support, down payment assistance, 2201 Maple Ridge, Celine's house. I stared at that line until the numbers blurred. I turned another page and froze. Expense. Vets Memorial Cemetery. Dual plot reservation. Row. E and row. R. I blinked hard. That cemetery was reserved for service members and their spouses. Neither of my parents had served a day in uniform, yet they used my military benefits to buy themselves a spot among heroes. A sound left my throat, something between a breath and a sob. I wasn't even sure which one it was. I took the folder and walked slowly down the hall. The house had gone quiet. My mother was no longer in the kitchen. I found myself in my old bedroom, now converted into a guest room with new paint and generic throw pillows, but the closet was untouched. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down an old shoebox I hadn't opened in years. Inside were sand-stained letters I had sent home from Iraq, a drawing from a little girl I'd carried out of a collapsed building in Mosul. She'd colored the American flag with crayon, a Polaroid of me and my squad, all of us in dusty gear, all of us smiling despite the weight we carried. They'd kept these things, but they'd kept something else too. At the bottom of the box was a crisp white envelope, unopened, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Rowe. Return address, Lieutenant Cole Dennis R. Michaels, 82nd Airborne. I opened it slowly. Inside was a commendation letter. My commendation, for bravery under fire during an ambush. My CO had sent it home, hoping it would bring my parents pride, but they'd never mentioned it. They never gave it to me. I sat on the bed, letter in hand, rage curling slowly into something quieter, but sharper. Not flames, steel. They'd stolen my money, my recognition, my history. They'd smiled and called me difficult, ungrateful, damaged. And they did it while smiling into the cameras at fundraisers where they held up flags they never earned. But I was still standing. I stood up, walked back to the kitchen, and pulled out my phone. "Thomas," I said when my lawyer picked up. "Yes? I need you to start tracing every transaction from a trust fund labeled under my name. Freeze the account. And while we're at it, I want the house appraised." "Tonight?" "Yes," I said. "And Thomas, I want every piece of it public." There was a pause. Understood. I hung up and felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, not yet, but direction. Just as I was setting the paperwork back in the folder, my phone buzzed again. A message from my cousin Mara. "Be careful," it read. "Your dad's been asking around. Something about guardianship. He told Uncle Ray you weren't well enough to manage your own finances." The room went cold around me. So that was the next move. They weren't just trying to silence me, they were trying to erase me. I set the phone down, took a breath, and looked around the quiet kitchen. I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting for my very identity. Fighting for my identity meant dragging myself out of bed at dawn, wrists aching from clutching that file all night, and driving to the county clerk's office before the courthouse flag even left half staff. Gray clouds drifted over the historic square. The old cannon on the lawn pointed at nothing in particular, but I felt its silent encouragement just the same. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above scuffed linoleum. I carried a binder stuffed with trust fund statements, forged discharge forms, and the provisional guardianship letter Celine never imagined I would see. By my side stood General Loring, witness, ally, moral ballast. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence said everything. At the counter, a clerk with coffee-stained paperwork blinked as I slid my petition across. I'm filing an objection to any guardianship and requesting a temporary restraining order against further petitions in my name, I said, voice flat but clear. The clerk skimmed the first page, eyes widening when she saw my father's signature above a dead doctor's stamp. She called her supervisor. Within 20 minutes, the emergency motion was stamped, received, and whisked upstairs to the probate judge. Steely resolve gave way to cautious optimism. One wall fortified. Thomas, my attorney, met us 2 blocks away in his cramped office that smelled like copier toner and determination. He powered up an ancient desktop and dove into the county archives while I paced. 40 minutes later he looked up, pale. Found something. He turned the screen toward me. A 2014 PDF, notarized, titled, Guardianship. Mental health provision. My father's name in bold. The co-signature, Dr. Kenneth Wilcox, our family GP who'd passed away 9 years ago. It was never filed, Thomas said, pointing at the blank docket stamp. But it's valid enough that they could recycle it. They planned this, I whispered, anger coiling low in my belly. Filed the bullet, waited for the right day to fire it. We drove across town to a civil rights firm recommended by the general. Attorney Monica Reyes greeted me with a handshake firm enough to crack stone. She scanned the forged letter, then looked me square in the eye. They built a trap, but it's rusty. You've already blocked the guardianship. Now we build your counter-offensive. Medical experts, command officers, VA therapists, anyone who can attest you're perfectly competent. I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. At noon, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I answered anyway. Selena's voice dripped through the line. You're blowing this up for no reason, always making everything about your trauma. Before she could continue, I opened the messenger app and sent her a photo. The guardianship PDF with a bright red caption, nice try. See you in court. Then I ended the call. 15 minutes later, she stormed into Thomas's office, heels clicking like gunfire. You ambush us with lawyers? She hissed. I slid a printed copy of Dr. Wilcox's forged diagnosis across the oak desk. Guess I should have made it about your trauma, I said quietly. She snatched the paper, face draining. This is private. It was never private. It was predatory. Thomas escorted her out with professional calm, then looked at me. Your sister just gave us proof they're rattled. By early afternoon, the story was stirring beyond courthouse walls. A reporter from the Fairfax Sentinel emailed asking for comment on alleged financial exploitation of a combat veteran. I declined the interview for now, but attached watermark scans of the trust withdrawals and the fake medical letter. Facts, not feelings. At 3 o'clock, the veteran advocacy group confirmed funding for my case. They would cover expert witnesses, filing fees, even transportation for squadmates willing to testify. General Loring shook my hand outside Thomas's office. Told you, you're not alone. Driving home, local radio buzzed with a teaser. Tonight at 6, did a decorated medic lose her benefits to family fraud? Dad's favorite AM station. I pictured him gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. Back at the house, I sat with Thomas on a conference call while he scheduled the preliminary hearing. 2 weeks out, enough time to gather records, not enough for my parents to conjure new excuses. We'll subpoena the bank, the cemetery, the VA deposit logs, Thomas said. Your father's diagnosis won't survive daylight. I nodded. Let's make it public. That night, exhaustion pressed behind my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. I reread the commendation letter, the ink steady even as my hands trembled. Around midnight, headlights cut across my curtains and stopped. A sedan idled at the curb. No engine trouble, no door opening, just the of intimidation. It remained there until the sky bruised with pre-dawn blue, then rolled away without a trace. I jotted the time in a notebook, underlined it twice. Whatever they planned next, I'd be ready. 2 nights before the hearing, the same car returned. It parked beneath the flickering street lamp outside my window and stayed 4 hours, engine off, silhouette visible behind the glass, before melting into the darkness just as the first bird broke the silence. I watched from behind the curtain, phone camera recording, pulse steady. They wanted fear. All they fed was my resolve. When dawn finally bled through the blinds, I was still upright in the living room chair, the recorder in my lap blinking red. The sedan down the street coughed to life, taillights winking before it rolled away. 4 hours of engine-off vigilance, no reason except intimidation. That made it personal. I showered, dressed in jeans and a VA softball tee, and tucked the recorder into my pocket along with a small spiral pad. Outside, the chill carried the scent of wet leaves and diesel. I crossed the curb, snapped a photo of the plate, Virginia tags, numbers easy to memorize, and headed for the pickup. On the way to the vet center, I phoned Dwight, a buddy who ran vehicle checks for the county. Off the record, I said, giving him the plate. He whistled low 10 minutes later. Registered to a Jake Rowe, Arlington. Jake, our second cousin. The one who texted me pictures of his new bass boat. but hadn't bothered to send Mom a get well card. Funny how family chooses its moments. Dwight lowered his voice. Seen that tag flagged by neighborhood patrols near your street twice this week? My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Appreciate the heads up. At the VA center, I borrowed a cubicle and used the office phone to call Jake from a blocked number. I pitched my voice light casual. Hey, man, it's Wade, Celine's husband. Need an update? The usual spot? Jake took the bait. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye. She's at the VA again. Same routine. Tell Uncle Ron she lives alone most nights. Easier if the room seemed to tilt. Easier if I went down quietly. Thanks, I said, then hung up before my pulse betrayed me. I texted Jake from my own line. Coffee? Need to clear the air. He responded in under a minute. Guilt loves speed. We met at Riverside Diner, neutral ground. He slid into the booth opposite me, smelling of cheap aftershave and confidence. I clicked the recorder inside my purse. Long week, he sighed. Family drama. I stirred my coffee. Tell me about it. Words spilled. Dad had promised him a slice of the estate once the guardianship went through. If I was declared incompetent, the house would sell, debts would clear, everyone would be happy. Everyone except me. I let him talk until the self-pity pooled on the table. Then I lifted the recorder, pressed stop, and set it beside his mug. That little device disagrees, I said. Color drained from his cheeks. Eileen, save it. My attorney will call. Cooperate or that recording becomes public. I walked out, recorder in pocket, leaving him to pay the check. Thomas nearly dropped his glasses when I played the tape in his office. This is organized coercion, he said. We can add criminal conspiracy to the filing. He burned copies, emailed the prosecutor, and requested a hearing expansion. The judge approved public testimony. Wheels turning. Your word leaked fast. By evening, veterans I barely remembered were messaging. You stitched my shoulder in Kabul. I'll speak. You dragged me to the chopper under fire. Count me in. The VA assigned a liaison. They'd back me on confidence. That momentum rattled the house of cards. My phone rang. Mom. Voice quivering. Why are you doing this to us? I answered evenly. I'm doing it for me, Mom, and for every vet who can't fight back. She started to cry. I let the silence sit, then ended the call. Minutes later, a text from Dad. You don't know what you're starting. Delete. Night fell. I spread every document across my kitchen table. The forged diagnosis, the siphoned trust statements, bank printouts, cemetery receipts, my real discharge papers, pages overlapped like armor plates. I whispered to the empty room. Tomorrow, I speak, and they will listen. The clock ticked past midnight. I closed the binder, drew the blinds, and double-checked the door locks. Sleep, when it came, was shallow but dreamless. Morning light found me in the driveway loading boxes into the truck. A neighbor waved. I waved back, watchful. No sedan in sight, but vigilance had become reflex. I drove a different route to Thomas's office, eyes on rear-view mirrors, noting every repeated headlight. That night, after final prep with the legal team, I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen window. At 11:03 p.m., headlights crept down the block and stopped beneath the same flickering lamp. I hit record on my phone again. The silhouette in the driver's seat didn't move. 4 hours ticked by, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring until the car glided away at 3 a.m. I uploaded the footage to a secure folder, copied the link to Thomas and wrote for the file, harassment. I wasn't scared. I was documenting the next piece of evidence. What I didn't know was that someone else had filed to testify. Someone I hadn't seen since the dust of Kandahar settled over our boots. I learned the name of the mystery witness only when Thomas slid a supplemental list across the table an hour before court. Sergeant Major Samuel Ford, my old squad leader, the man who'd patched my shoulder with a strip of his own sleeve in Kandahar and barked, "Stay with me, Ro. Mission's not done." I hadn't seen him since medevac dust swallowed the sky. Inside the courthouse, the gallery filled fast. Veterans in service caps, neighbors, 2 local news crews. My parents sat at the defense table, expressions carved from stone. Celine perched beside our mother, scrolling her phone like this was a conference break. I felt none of it, only the odd calm that settles before the first boom. The judge, a silver-haired woman with desert tan ribbons of her own on the robe, called the docket. Our attorney outlined the trust siphoning, the forged diagnosis, the guardianship plot. Evidence screens glowed, bank ledgers, cemetery invoices, Jake's recorded confession. Murmurs swelled then wilted as the judge raised a hand. "Call your next witness," Thomas said. A chair scraped in the back row. I turned, and there he was. Ford, uniform pressed sharp, metals glinting like rivets in the overhead lamps. He walked with the steady cadence of someone who still counted distance in clicks, not steps. Every eye followed him to the stand. Under oath, his voice carried across the wood-paneled room. "Ma'am, I led Ghost Echo 3rd Squad. Sergeant Aileen Rowe was my senior medic. August 9, 2006, she ordered a counter-route during a convoy and personally evacuated 6 wounded under direct fire. One was me." He tapped his chest above the Bronze Star. "We survived because she refused to leave any of us." Thomas asked, "In your judgment, is Sergeant Rowe competent to manage her own affairs?" Ford's laugh rumbled. "She managed a field hospital in a moving Humvee. Sir, she could run this courthouse if you gave her a map." I heard a sharp exhale. My father's Ford wasn't finished. "May I read from a declassified debrief?" he asked. The judge nodded. He recited the line I'd never seen. Medic Rowe displayed exceptional judgment exceeding that of senior officers on site. He closed the folder. Unfit? His gaze pinned my father. She's the reason I'm standing here. Silence cracked wide. Even Celine stopped typing. Dad rose, face blotched. Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding, not fraud. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Rowe, I have notarized ledgers showing over $200,000 transferred from your daughter's account to yours. She lifted another document. And a provisional guardianship signed by a deceased physician. How do you explain that? My mother buried her face in her hands. Dad's reply dissolved into stammers. Thomas motioned me forward. I stood uniform straight though I wore a simple navy blazer. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, I said, voice steady. I came because silence is the soil where this grows. I fought for my country. I came home scarred, outside and in. But I worked, paid taxes, helped other vets. My family took the money meant for that recovery and tried to label me broken so they could keep taking. I let the words settle, then added softly, I'm not broken. And I'm not alone. The judge spoke only once more. The court freezes all trust assets pending criminal review, awards immediate restitution to Miss Rowe, and issues a protective order preventing further guardianship filings. A gasp rippled. My father slumped. Celine stared at the floor tiles as if numbers might appear and solve something. Outside, cameras clicked. I declined interviews, yet whispered for the microphones anyway. Tell the quiet ones, they don't have to stay quiet. Ford guided me to his truck. We drove to the vet center where a banner read, You are not forgotten. For the first time, I believed it. Weeks passed. I joined the advocacy group, walking new claimants through labyrinths I now knew too well. Every scarred arm I shook felt like stitching a seam torn long ago. My story traveled. Church bulletins, VA newsletters, an op-ed on guardianship abuse, not for fame, for light. One evening I returned to the empty childhood house. Realtors had cleared the furniture. Echoes answered my footsteps. I set a framed copy of that long-lost commendation on the marble mantel. Not a tribute to them, an anchor for me. I touched the glass, whispered thanks to the ghosts who stood beside me in court and let the front door click shut for the last time. Sometimes the loudest justice is delivered in total hush. The moment a room realizes the person they tried to erase now stands at its center.